Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Gender Equity in Language Translating Content for Inclusive Engagement from our webinar today. We're thrilled to have you all here. I'm Krista, Head of Marketing for Context Translations, and just a few bits of housekeeping from me. Please feel free to use the chat functionality in Zoom to connect with fellow attendees and our panel, and use the Q&A function for any questions that you've got. We will get to those at the end of today's session, and if we can't get to all the questions, we'll reach out to you on a one-to-one basis, so please feel free to ask any questions that you have. We'll also share at the end of the webinar a first draft of our digital scribers efforts to visually show the discussion, and once we've shared that fully with the panel and we've done any edits, we will share that fully with you, the attendees, so you have a visual representation of what has been discussed today. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Carolina, who is a project manager here at Context Translations and one of our experts in gender equity. Carolina, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely afternoon so far. I'm incredibly excited to welcome you all to our webinar on gender equity in language. We first thought about hosting this event, having recognized the clear importance of gender fair language in our society and, as a consequence, successful translation work that resonates with and is inclusive of a variety of target audiences. We want to take this opportunity to forefront the experiences and expertise of our team of linguists, to learn more about the topic at hand and potentially understand what it is that we are yet to learn more about. As a starting point in doing so, how about defining what gender equitable language can be understood as? Following our preparations, it's become clear that the topic is very broad and very nuanced, with said nuances rooted in various factors which often differ across different languages and different cultures. Therefore, the topic of today's event can be defined in a suitably broad manner, as described by the United Nations, with gender fair language being speaking and writing in a way that does not discriminate against a particular sex, social gender, or gender identity, and does not perpetuate gender stereotypes. So, without further ado, we're joined here by our team of linguists who will share with us their insights on the topic and discuss and compare their experiences and their expertise. So please let's now take a few minutes to say hello to our panelists and to listen to their introductions. So I'll just follow the order in which people appear for me for this on my screen. So Rebecca, if you don't mind going first.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Carolina. And yeah, hi, everybody. Nice to see you. My name is Rebecca. I'm a translator. My working languages are English, Spanish, Italian to German. I live in Germany, and I have been working as a translator for almost 20 years now. Yeah. And yeah, in my daily life, I'm just confronted with this topic like every day. So I also find it a very important one to discuss.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thanks for being here. Camille, you're next on my screen.
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Camille. I'm a French linguist living in Lyon, in France. And I have been a translator for more than 5 years now. So I work with English and Spanish, but mainly English. And one of my main field of expertise is marketing. So a field where gender fair language is more and more present. And as a feminist and a member of the LGBTQA+ community myself, where it's a very important topic for me. So I'm really happy that Context has me today to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Camille, and thanks for joining. Eloise?
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Eloise. I am the slight odd one out from a translation perspective in that I actually work as a strategic linguistic consultant. So using the discipline of linguistics to really add more weight and credence to marketing efforts and to communication and what we do with that. So obviously this is such a crucial topic for any company anywhere in the world to be discussing. And I think what I'm most excited to learn from my fellow panelists today, to kind of hear more about everybody's questions, but really to think about not just how can we make, gender equitable language more accessible, more understandable for people, but, what are we actually saying in those messages as well? And how is that landing with your audience? So absolutely thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Eloise. Then we have Ruben.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruben, and I've been working in the localization field since 2011, first as an in-house translator in Italy, and then as a freelancer here in Barcelona, where I live. I translate from English and Spanish to Italian, and I mainly work on UI, UX, and marketing content. But a couple of years ago, I also began teaching online classes on inclusive language. And I started focusing on gender, but then I broadened the program to include also disability, race and ethnicity, age, and socioeconomic status. And I'm very glad to be here to share a bit of my experience with you. And I'd like to thank all the contact team for inviting me today.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Great to have you here. And then last but not least, we have Ari. Hi, Ari. I think you're on mute. Oh, I think we're not picking up your sound, I'm afraid.
No, we're not, Ari, I'm afraid. I don't know if you want to dial out and dial back in.
How about now?
Oh, yeah, it's working now.
Okay. I don't know what's happening, but technology. So I work as a translator and recently as an interpreter, but I'm also a proofreader and editor in Spanish. So I work with gender fair and inclusion constantly. I help some organizations like better their abilities to communicate in gender fair, and also like inclusion that includes, sorry for the repetition. It's also about disabilities, race, and yeah, citizenship. So that's what I work on. I'm very happy to be here and a bit nervous because nothing's working on my computer, but let's hope it goes well. Thank you.
No, definitely. Thank you so much, Ari. And yeah, we can hear you perfectly now. So I'm sure all is fine now. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone. So let's move on to the first part of our discussion titled Framing the Context, which will hopefully allow us to better understand the role and the prominence of gender fair language in the translation sphere specifically. So with the first question in that section being, how has the topic of gender fair language in translation evolved since the start of your career? So yeah, this is a question posed to our panel of linguists. If anyone would like to share some insights on it.
I might just start if you want. Yeah, well, I said I started like 20 years ago, and back then I mainly translated IT content, which is also very specific industry. Also with the, well, of course we all use IT products, but back then there was really, I must say, no awareness. Not much in the German society, and specifically not in that very technology branch. So whenever, we didn't even think about if to use gender sensitive language in our translations. And also because with IT content software, you often have very limited space, which is one of the constraints when using gender sensitive language. But ever since, and especially in the last years, we have a broad discussion in Germany about the use of more inclusive language. And what I see now is that really with almost every new project that I take on, this is one of the basic first things to agree upon. Shall we be more inclusive or not? What is the company culture? What people do you want to address as a company? And it is super important and essential, and also for us to know, because it just affects the work we do. And I always try to advocate for a gender sensitive language, because I think companies nowadays really cannot, they must be a bit more open and like try to address more people. And I think this really has changed a lot over the last years, specifically the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. Although it's a heated debate, it's not so easy.
Yeah, it's very interesting to know. I mean, with the amount of experience that you have, having worked in translation for so many years, it's very nice to have that example of, you know, there is a very clear evolution of the topic, of the conversations that we're having about it. So it's great to hear that there is a lot more prominence, that is a lot more prominent these days as well. Camille, would you say that this is matched by the French market and kind of attitudes as well?
Yes, I'm a baby translator next to you, because I've just been a translator for 5 years. But I remember, even since it's just been 5 years, when I was during my master's degree, so done more than 5 years ago, when we were talking about that in class, it was more like, you know, you have to be careful because some clients might ask you to be careful. And now it's really more like you have to be careful. Well, not all clients, but most of the clients, and especially since I've done a little research on the internet, and I think it depends if the client is more like, let's say, old-fashioned or not. Because I in 2017, sorry, the Académie Française, so basically the institution ruling French language, they felt the need to talk about inclusive language, or to say if they were against, they thought it was a mortal peril for language. But it shows that it's more and more talked about, because we felt the need to actually say something on the topic. So it's a proof that in society people were talking about it. And in 2021, there were a circular in May about using gender fair language in school, either in administrative part or in the textbooks and all. So again, it shows that it's more and more talked about. And in November 2021, there's a dictionary that added, it's a pronoun called yel, which is basically a mix of il and elle, so the equivalent of they in English, or what we want to make an equivalent of. And so it proves that people are talking about it more and more, and we definitely see more and more articles about it in the press. Depending on the newspaper, it's more or less against. and I, as I said, I'm a member of the LGBT plus community and a feminist, and I can see that in these circles, it's not even an option anymore. It's used like all the time, but because they're the first people concerned by gender fair language, so it makes sense that everyone using it a lot. But yeah, we can even in the general press, you can see more and more articles about it, because people are trying to understand, so it's quite nice. But so yeah, people are writing articles about it, trying to educate people.
Yeah, that's very great to know. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I would like to say that in Latin America, there's been a lot of debate around it, and of course, the more progressive sector is very much into trying to use some gender fair language in some variation. But for example, the city of Bogota, the mayor's office tried to change the Bogota slogan that used to be Bogota para todos. So Bogota for everybody, but everybody in masculine. That's like the universal masculine. To Bogota para todos y todas. So for everybody female and everybody male. There was a lawsuit around it, and they changed it for a bit and then it got back down. So it's again Bogota para todos, but there is debate around it. And also in Santiago de Chile, which I think it's a really interesting case, the transportation system did a campaign on gender fair language, and they're trying to use todes, which is like a neutral version of everybody. It's very disruptive for the Royal Academy of Spanish, but it's really interesting, and it's happening also at the political level. So yeah.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you, Camille. Yeah, it's really interesting to know of all of these examples, which are also so country specific as well when it comes to the different institutions that are at play and the different parts of the countries as well. So yeah, thank you. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add on this question? Maybe any ideas of where do you see the topic going towards, kind of like evolving in the future as well? If not, we can just move on to the next section, which is questions to the panel.
I saw there was a question that popped up in the Q&A around, has anyone seen a style guide where this is reflected? And I think that it, first of all, is a great question. And as someone who tends to write style guides for a number of organizations, it's always one of those things where, because I'm not an expert in gender equity, it's always something I would pass to someone who was. But I think what's interesting to note about it, and again, not coming at this from a translation perspective, but the fact is that when we have languages, when we use language that's gender fair, it actually reinforces our perception of the world around us. So I think what's so important is not just that we have these terms that obviously denote the breadth of gender that we have, or to make people feel included, which is vital, but it's the fact that it also changes our perceptions politically and socially of the world around us. So I can't remember where I read it. I think it was the European Institute for Gender Equality, and it basically said that a lot of gender, when we use gender sensitive language, we start to, it's not that it makes us more or gives us more of an appetite for equality, but what it provides instead is perhaps people are less likely to see reasons to not create gender equality, if that makes sense. So depending on the language that you use, it reinforces your perceptions of the world around you. And I think there's much more consciousness of that now, today. I think, you know, as Rebecca and Camille both said, in the last sort of few years, things have really evolved and shifted to become more inclusive. That brings with it a risk of being very performative in our language and doing it for the sake of doing it, which is always very dangerous. But the crucial thing is that much more people are having a conversation. I think that's really encouraging. And without throwing Ruben in the deep end, as someone who, you know, hosts his own kind of courses and classes on this, I'd love to know how that's evolved and what people are saying when they come to you, Ruben, and ask you about getting involved and having more of an appetite for these discussions.
Maybe if you can repeat the question, because
of course, yeah.
But I just wanted to add one thing, that sometimes this topic is felt like very new. It's something like that is very routine nowadays, but it came to my mind that one of the first guidelines about sexist Italian was written in 1987 by Alba Sabatini. So this is not kind of a new topic. Anyway, your question was what the audience is asking me for in my classes.
And are you seeing more people come to your classes? Have you found more? So maybe it's not a new concept, obviously, you know, publications from 1987, but do you see more and more people discussing it now? Is it more widely discussed in your experience?
I say so. I mean, I only teach since for 2 years now. The last course I made, there were like 73 people attending. So it's very interesting because also I try to tackle the topic on the practical side. I mean, people is eager in understanding how to cope with translating a neutral, gender-neutral language into a non-gender-neutral language. So, which are the strategies what we can do when we have to cope with singular they or all the diversity, generally speaking. So, I think that is interesting, and what I try to do is being reassuring. I mean, because since there is a lot of confusion, or sometimes a lot of fear about the topic, I try to settle everything down, say, okay, don't worry, we can try our best to be as respectful as possible, but sometimes we we have to surrender to the least worst. So yeah, I try to stick to the practical side and to find the right balance for each type of text.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben and Eloise. That's super interesting to find out more about. What are the factors would you say to keep in mind when introducing gender fair language in translation? We've already spoken a bit about the different components like the market attitudes, etc. Are there any other examples, or would you like to discuss any of that in more detail? Especially from the translation perspective, in terms of the kind of information that is available to you as well.
I can start the
Yeah.
topic. So I usually think about I have three questions I try to answer in order to decide how to approach the fair language in a translation. I'm sorry, four questions. So the first one is, what's the political stance of the client? I tend to work with NGOs, so I usually know they are interested in translating in a gender inclusive way. But I try to understand if they're conservative or liberal, or what type of progressive organizations are they? Because as Ruben was saying, there are different strategies to approach gender inclusive translation. So yeah, I try to answer that. And who is the text speaking about? If it's about a group of people, it is gender relevant in that group of people. For example, there are some like translation softwares that will systematically translate in Spanish doctor in masculine and housekeeper in feminine. Like there's just every time. So is gender irrelevant in the text? I think gender is always relevant in any text, but is it like specifically relevant in that text? Then I would ask what the tone of the text is. Is it really formal? Is it informal? Is it directed to people that already know about the topic? Or yeah, and then who is the text addressing? And that would lead me to decide which type of gender inclusive language to use, or if definitely I would need to just use universal masculine for everything. And yeah, that would be it. I would also add that it's important to take into account the intersectionality of gender. So for example, if there's a word that's been troubling me a lot lately, which is citizens and citizenship, because I can translate it in a gender neutral language as ciudadanía. So choosing a word that refers to a group and not a particular person. But then citizenship, for example, or citizens doesn't include undocumented migrants. So I think it's really important to take into account the intersectionality of what we're translating and who are we talking about and who are we talking to, in order just not to like check the box of yeah, I'm gender inclusive, but then I'm leaving out a lot of people that were also included in the original text.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Ari. Yeah, I think it's very crucial to think about how those topics and different facets of inclusivity overlap as well. And also it's nice to know that to find out more about that repertoire that is out there for you to use that is specific to your language, that may incorporate varying levels of inclusivity as well. And that's like an active choice that a translator has to make that approach most suitable for the content too. Yeah, are there any other factors, any other frameworks that anyone else uses when thinking about gender fair language in translation? Any challenges that might be specific to your language as well? Becca?
Yeah, I was just thinking when preparing for this webinar today, an example came up that I had to translate lately, and which really gave me a headache because it did not work in the end. I think I had to surrender. I will read it out to you. It's just very short. It's actually from a study, sorry, from a study that I think the Boston University has done. It's a little riddle. It goes like this. A father and a son are in a horrible car crash that kills the dad. The son is rushed to the hospital just as he's about to go under the knife. The surgeon says, I can't operate. That boy is my son. So, wait, back to you. So this, for example, is something that, yeah, in English is a problem because occupations have you often no gender. Yeah, you have this generic, this generic masculine that a doctor can be a man or a woman. In this case, the doctor is the mother of the boy. Yeah. So, but I think 2/3 of the people who had to solve this riddle couldn't come up with an answer. They said, maybe the son has two dads, so he's the son of a gay couple, or and it was really not the first idea of many people that the doctor could actually be a woman. And this is, of course, also due to the fact that maybe for a long time women were not allowed to become doctors or so. Anyway, these then and I had to translate it in the context of an an e-learning program for an EDI initiative. And in the end, I had to come up with a different example because it doesn't work for German. In German, we have a female and a male, like this job description, like this. For example, this is I just had to think of this example. Yeah. But in general, we had this question about guidelines and if this is ever covered in guidelines. And yes, this is absolutely important. And I see that a lot of clients do think about it and also integrate it in their language guidelines before a translation project starts. It's a lot of grammatic things and so on. But also gender is often an aspect now. And if it's not, I would always ask because it's crucial for the whole translation process then. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just jump in and weigh in again from I feel like such an imposter as a non-translating person over here. But you guys look at that using super gendered language, but in terms of the community of translators, you have your work cut out for you in so many ways, because whilst I might perceive doctor as being a gender neutral term in English, it still is, there's a gender implied in it, the universal masculine that we use, whereas we would have poet versus poetess, but then people don't like poetess because we would surely, everyone's just a poet, for example. But I think that translators, you're not just thinking about all of these different gender-based considerations, but then also the kind of the truth and the quality of the translation that you're producing as well. There are so many different facets to consider. That I genuinely take my hat off to you. I think it's incredible the work that everybody does. It just blows my mind, to be honest with you.
Second that. Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. Yeah, and so I think we've touched on that already, but what are the specific strategies that can be used in your language to introduce gender fair language? So as mentioned by Ari earlier, there is this repertoire in Spanish that kind of incorporates various levels of linguistic innovation in a sense, just because a lot of them will be fairly new strategies or strategies that exist in the language but have this new usage to be more gender neutral, gender inclusive. would you mind sharing with us a handful of examples, just so that we can kind of understand this language-specific difference, the variety of approaches that we would be able to work with?
I can get it if you want.
Yeah, of course.
As for Italian, I would say that we have three main options that main options to avoid the generic universal masculine, which are very similar, I guess, to those one used in other Romance languages. First, we can try to neutralize the sentence using a periphrasis, just like saying "Ti diamo il benvenuto," that is, "we welcome you," instead of "welcome, benvenuto." Or also we can leverage invariable nouns. For instance, persona, person, is grammatically feminine in Italian, but doesn't have a semantic gender, so it can be used like a neutral noun. Or as Harry said, we can use collective nouns, like saying direzione, management, instead of direttore, which is masculine and is manager. Even if sometimes these nouns are not perfect synonyms and should be used with care. And second, we can duplicate the nouns, for instance, like saying traduttori, traduttrici for translators, so mentioning both the masculine and the feminine case. And third, we can use innovative solutions. But this is not a choice to be made lightly, as the conversation around those solutions is very heated. And in any case, every strategy has pros and cons, as they can affect either readability, fluency, and accuracy of a translation, not mentioning the length of a translation, which is very important in localization. A periphrasis can be way longer than a single noun. So as I was saying, it's all about finding the right balance for each specific context. For instance, video games and audiovisual content are more suitable for making experiments, while institutional and legal content is not. And last but not least, we should also be aware of using stereotypical images, which means avoiding the occasion woman equals mother and housewife and man equals householder. And it might be absurd in 2023, but this type of stereotype is still very present, very widespread in newspapers, television, and marketing campaigns. So we should not only focus on grammar, but also on the message we are delivering, or we are translating in this case.
I would like to add that we should also take into account that the inclusion in terms of disability, for example, the software that reads the text on a screen. There's a name I just forgot about. I forgot the name. Doesn't read the words that are modified with an X. Spanish, like in Latino Spanish, for example, Latinx, or that gender inclusion through the X or through the alt, the text reader won't read it. So the person who can't really read it and is listening can't get the word. So that's also an important thing to take into account.
Thank you, Ari. Yeah, once again, that's very interesting to know about those different types of inclusivity that we should be aware of. And thank you, Ruben, for sharing with us the strategy specific to Italian. Did I hear someone starting to speak? Camille, was it you?
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I wanted to add something about what Ruben said, because of course Italian and French would have the same, well, same as Spanish actually. We all have the same problems because we are languages where by essence they are masculine and feminine. And like you said, we can use feminine and masculine, or you can try to find a name that is suitable for both, like say the management instead of the director, for example. And you can use parentheses, or what in French we call the point médian, basically a dot, to put an E, so we know that it's also girls. And also I have found out during my research, I hadn't thought about it, but And then I thought, yes, of course, it is gender inclusive, but basically just if it was about job titles, and if the person working is a girl or a woman, basically just putting it in the feminine form. And the example was like, for example, a woman who's writing, instead of saying, well, in French there are two forms, but you can say an autrice instead of an auteur, which is basically masculine. And it seems stupid. I felt stupid not thinking about it, but yeah, just putting, if it's a girl, you put it in the feminine, it's already inclusive rather than putting a general masculine, you know. And I also wanted to add it for the adjectives. It's almost the same. You can use this parenthesis or promédian, but you can also change a sentence entirely, which is something that I do more and more because I'm translating a lot of research studies. And so oftentimes you have, are you interested by this or that? Most of the time I would switch it and say, does this interest you? Basically translated literally, just because you don't have then to think about, should I find a neutral name? Should I put a parenthesis? Will the client be okay with it? And you just, basically you go around the obstacles, if we can say so.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's good to know that there are sometimes options to actually avoid having to make that decision as well. That is particularly relevant if, as it's been mentioned already, but that innovation isn't necessarily as appropriate for the kind of content that you're working with, etc. So yeah, thank you, Camille. Rebecca, I think would you mind sharing some insights on the German language and the different strategies?
Sure. Yeah, for German, we also have various choices. I just lately attended like a workshop by the Rat der Deutschen Sprache, which is like an official authority that also guards the use of language. And I was very surprised to hear that they only approve a version that uses the male and female. No, so trans and non-binary people are not covered by it. It would be like, let's stick with the example of a student. It would be liebe Schüler und Schülerinnen. So we have the male and the female version. That is the officially accepted version, but actually in companies and in written and spoken language, you have various choices. You can use an asterisk, Gendersternchen, we call it. You can use a gap, a gender gap. When you speak, you make a little pause, like SchülerInnen. Or you can also, for example, you can use like you can use a workaround solution. You can say, for example, Studierende for students instead of Studenten und Studenten. So there are options. A lot of them I really like and they work. But in German, a problem, for example, is that we use a lot of relative clauses, and then we have to use pronouns, articles. This makes it all super long. German in general is already longer than English, and when space is limited for translation, when you only have limited space, and you really have to decide, what is more important? You have to ask your client, what is more important to you, that we are inclusive? Do you want to come across as inclusive? Do you want to address more people? Or is it very important to you how it looks, how the screen looks, for example, on a mobile phone, things like that. But we do have a lot of options in German. And I have the impression that although there's a lot of discussion about it in public, and also a lot of people are against it, and there are also certain backlashes, we might be in a phase where it's a bit more maybe disruptive, as Ari said in the beginning, but it will settle at some point, and with whatever solution. So there's not really a right or wrong. We just have to see. It's trial and error in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this will set us up nicely to kind of discuss the point of this webinar, really, which is why is gender fair content necessary? Based on, obviously, we've already uncovered the different factors that have an impact on it, the different strategies in which it can be implemented. I would now like to invite you to kind of discuss why, from a translator's perspective, the linguist perspective, you would say that gender fair content is needed in translation in general.
Yeah, can I go if it's okay with everyone?
Of course.
I would say that it's necessary because more and more people, like we said, are aware of issues linked to gender fair language and just gender in general, like increasing women's visibility, I don't know who said it, non-binary people as well. And I was also thinking it's less gender, but also of different types of families. Because to be honest, I'm concerned because I'm married with a woman, and so every time I see, everywhere like husband and wife or mothers and fathers, even if it could be two fathers or two mothers, and people are more and more aware of that. And so people may not engage with a brand if they feel it's not inclusive, or if they are, like, I don't know which one to go to, they might go to the one that seems more inclusive because, well, for them it's important. And actually, I think companies should really embrace it, because once it's implemented, you have to educate people on it at the beginning, but then once it's implemented, it's really beneficial for the brand or the company with not real effort. I think once it's implemented and people know about it and know how to deal with it, I don't think it's that complicated in the daily task and all. So I think it's beneficial for the companies without too much effort once the initial one has been done. And it's also that companies that basically don't want to do the efforts might seem, I don't know if it's the correct word in English, but like outdated. Like people might see them as, old-fashioned, and yeah, I'll go to the ones that are more inclusive and that I can relate to, because we often see that in brands, that they say that they want their customers to relate to them and they want to show their values and everyone, but I think it's an easy way of showing how inclusive you are, just by not that many efforts once you have educated all your people. So I think we should, I think that's why I think we should really embrace gender inclusive language, because eventually, I think it's my point of view, I'm not an expert in marketing, I'm not sure of what I'm going to say, but I think since people are more and more aware of it, the less effort you're going to make, the less customer you're going to have, and the ones that make the effort are going to gain more and more customers, and then in the end, that's going to damage your brand. I think I'm not an expert in marketing, but that's how I feel it as a customer. I hope it's not too far-fetched.
If I can jump in as someone who does deal with marketing on a regular basis, Camille, you're absolutely right. And I think that what I would say is that we see consumers today and our audiences are far more conscious than ever before of the impact of your buying power. So when it comes to, choosing a product or a service or choosing to subscribe to a particular company, I think, generations today, as a kind of consumer community today, we are far more interested in the the social impact, the inclusive nature of a company, the environment. I may have said environmental already. I'm so excited about that. But in terms of the the social good of a company, there is a huge amount to be gained there for everybody. And it's not just, we'll sell more products, be nicer in what you do, and be more accessible to others. It's really about, we can make a much kinder and more inclusive society if we're just prepared to do a bit of groundwork now. And I think companies that avoid that or don't get involved or think it's not a priority are missing out hugely, because people will make decisions, in terms of the reasons that we make purchase decisions. It can be the smallest reason that nudges us towards one company versus another. I want to know that what I'm spending my money on is going to have a positive impact on the world around me. And I think companies that are doing that by really living the values of gender inclusive language are going to be a far better choice for that modern consumer than a company who doesn't think it's important.
I will, if I can jump in, I will only add, I totally agree with Camille and Eloise, but I will just add that, yeah, maybe using a gender fair language won't fix any systemic discrimination system, but maybe it can fix biases in both humans and machines. I mean, we know that AIs tend to be a bit sexist and racist, but it's all about the data they are fed. So this includes also written and translated text. So maybe little by little, we can also work on biases also in artificial intelligence.
I think, sorry, also to jump back in, I think, and you know, the rest of the panel absolutely speak to this, but I think that that's where it's not just about do the gender inclusive language thing because it's going to get you more customers. That's the wrong reason to do gender inclusive language. You know, there's a benefit to it, there's a net benefit to it, but it runs the risk of being performative. And I think that's true of things like representation of any number of other, you know, intersections of identity. So really it's a whole puzzle, it's a whole human puzzle. But if you're doing it for the sake of adding to your bottom line, then, you know, I would question why you're doing it in the first place.
I'd like to add that, well, like for me as a trans person and as a non-binary person, and as a very politicized person in the topic, I think that every act of speech is political. And when you decide to use gender inclusive language or not, you're taking a political stance. Like the company or the client is taking a political stance, and we as translators are also deciding, are we going to translate for like this organization that really doesn't believe in what you stand for? Well, that's the case for me. Like, am I going to translate for this organization who's really against trans rights or not? So I think that that's really important to take into account. Like, every act of speech is political. Translating it has also a political value and a political content, and where we stand and the type of language we use and the type of like convincing we try to do to our clients to use gender inclusive language. I'm sorry, there's a fly in my house and my animals are going crazy, so there's a bunch of noise. So I think that we need to take this into account in our job as translators. Where are we going? Like, what's the future of gender inclusion, and how are we helping or how are we not helping towards what we want as individuals or as a collective? And yeah, I think that's why it's really important. For me, it's really important because my existence and my value in society depends on having people naming me, like having people allowing there to be a third option in a poll where they're asking me if I'm a woman or a man or if I'm a man. I need there to be a third option for me, right? So I think we as translators have a say and help towards there being another option, for there being other people to exist, even if that's not us, even if that doesn't really that's not our life experience. So yeah, I think I'm very passionate about it, and I think it's crucial for a lot of people to be named.
Thank you so much, Harry. Yeah, that's such an important insight to have, and yeah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about it with us and your experience. And Eloise, thank you also for sharing with us your perspective from the marketing stance as well. Are there any other points that you'd like to make before we essentially wrap up this section of the webinar and open the floor up to some questions from our attendees?
I'd like to add something on that point, a little example. So just last year, HBO did another season of Sex and the City. and they included some non-binary characters, which was huge, like for a lot of people. And I hope the person that did the subtitles in Spanish is not here, but the person, whoever did the subtitles, translated the neutral pronouns to feminine. Systematically, all the characters that were gender neutral or whatever variant of it were presented in Spanish in the subtitles in feminine, which was the whole point of the like that Sex and the City really big bet on inclusion. So I think like our job is so important in that way. Like Spanish people who don't speak English, who are non-binary, did not get any representation on that show. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we had the same problem in French with sex education. There was a non-binary character, and in French, I think they used the feminine as well. And it was a shame. Apparently, I watched it in English, so with the French subtitles, so I wouldn't know. But apparently, people say that it was even weirder because in the dubbed version, they managed to get the non-binary part, but not in the subtitles of the other way around, which is really weird. So yeah, I understand the problem. We had the same in France with some content. So it is really annoying because they're trying to make efforts, and then it's at the linguist part that it just, you know,
I
that's a problem.
have another example from Pokemon, the video game. There was this character Blanche that was, I mean, even they were not non-binary. I mean, their gender was never told, but it was translated in almost every language as a woman. Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. They were misgendered in any language. So maybe it wasn't so important for the game as a whole, but this way you lose the nuance about a character. So it's a pity.
Yeah, thank you. It's really important to hear these examples as well, to kind of understand better what tangible impact these approaches do have. And yeah, as we can see, a lot of the work that has been done in one area has been undone in other areas, which is definitely a big shame. Yeah, thank you very much for all of that. If it works for everyone, we will now end this main discussion section and open up the conversation to any questions from the audience. I can see that there were a lot of messages in the main webinar chat. So if there are any specific questions that you would like to pose to the panel, then please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window, and yeah, we'll work our way through as many of those as possible today within the 8 minutes that we have left. But if you have any questions that you would like to be answered, we can also answer them afterwards, contact you directly with any kind of insights on those as well. So please feel free. We do have a few questions ready. There is one from an anonymous attendee about the Italian language. So if we take a look at that at the moment, the question says, I have a question for Ruben regarding Italian. The Accademia della Crusca just a few days ago started the use of graphic symbols, schwa and asterisks, to duplicate words, or duplicate words, which is not accepted for legal content. However, as far as I'm aware, no mention about the general language use. I work with audio-visual and video game content, and I adopt different translation strategies, including the neutralization of the sentence and the other grammar workaround solutions you mentioned. However, it recently happened that the use of the schwa, previously approved by the client themselves, was flagged by some reviewers as linguistically wrong and unnatural. From a translator perspective, believing that the change can and maybe need to start from us, I find it challenging to give my contribution when it is flagged as wrong according to what I believe are non-inclusive language conventions. Do you have any suggestion on how to deal with this?
Well, this is a difficult question to answer, but as Ari said, it's very important to ask ourselves a few questions. I mean, did the schwa was used because of a reason, of a specific reason? Maybe there was some kind of non-binary character in the video game, or the video game was talking about some LGBTQ plus topic. The schwa, for those who are not aware of the schwa, is basically an upside down he. It's one of the innovative solutions that Italians is trying to introduce to fix the gender the gender issue in Italian. Poses a lot of accessibility issues. It is not easy to read, especially at the beginning. It's difficult for dyslexic people. It's difficult for people with autism. It cannot be read for text-to-speech for screen readers. So it cannot be used so lightly. And maybe using even in a video game, which as I was saying, a video game can be a place to make experiments. First, you have to agree with the client if you can use such a solution, because every solution, every strategy has pros and cons. So this is something. This is a client's call, I would say. Maybe we can make a proposal, and ask and see what the client think about it, because the schwa is actually ungrammatical. I mean, this is we cannot ignore it, but in some contexts it can be used given the client agrees. Where we are translators, where we work for an agency or a client, so if we write a text from scratch, if we are writing our text, we are building maybe we are developing our video game, which is native from that point of view, we can opt for a neutral solution. Otherwise, it's the client's goal.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben.
You're welcome.
We also have one more question actually related to the discussion about the subtitles from Giuseppina. Regarding these gender unfair subtitles, I believe this is also related to the lack of guidelines and info given to the translators and proofreaders, as well as a fail in quality check. Do you think there is a way to create guidelines or style guide that help in avoiding unfair representation? I think this could be a question to anyone who's familiar with the topic as well. Do you think this could have been kind of helped at an earlier stage before the translations happened?
Well, I think it could definitely have been useful. I mean, if it would avoid that, but then it also depends on the person. If the person is determined not to use gender fair content or language, I mean, you can't do much about it. But I would say that any style guide or guidelines, whatever the subject, is always good anyway, as long as it's not, 200 pages, because otherwise translators most of the time are discouraged to read it. But yeah, I mean, personally, I think guide design or style guide are always useful. So in this case, as in other cases, but yeah, I think it could avoid problems.
Yeah.
Even if it's all down to the person translating or reviewing anyway, but
yeah, I think Ari, Rebecca, also unmuted.
No, I completely agree. Every style guide is always very useful. And when it comes to subtitles in general, I also often see errors or whatever. But I think it's also that because translators who work in subtitles work under enormous pressure and time pressure mainly. And so I think this is often, you don't know the whole series, you don't know our characters. It is evolving, and then maybe at the beginning you are not aware of everything that comes afterwards. So you only have very little time to translate this, and that is what then happens. But as I said, any style guide is always very useful, really. And from my experience, I can only say if you ask clients to maybe work a bit more on their style guides, they're always very happy to cooperate and to listen to your input and experiences and maybe suggestions. So I can only tell everyone who's working as a translator, speak to your clients. It really helps.
Perfect, thank you. Ari, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I agree with Rebecca. I know people who do subtitling work under enormous pressure and yeah, with very little time. I think for me, especially, community consulting is really important. So if you have the time, which we usually don't as translators, and there are a lot of guides in Spanish at least, not great guides, but there's some, yeah, there's some better than others. But if you have the time, consult with organizations, with queer organizations who can point towards what's being used, because it, like in Latin American Spanish, it's changing a lot. It's changing very quickly. So if you have the time, consulting is always a good answer.
Perfect. Thank you very much,
I'm sorry,
everyone.
but not consulting your local trans neighbor, but an organization, or
Yeah, that's very important to note. Yes, thank you very much, everyone. I think these are all of the questions that we can cover during the live event today, but as mentioned, we'll reach out with more information on those in case they haven't been addressed here. Thank you, everyone, very, very much for attending. Thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to join, share their insights, experience, expertise, so many interesting observations and recommendations. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, to all of our attendees as well for taking the time to watch their webinar today. And I think that's it from me. Is there anything from your side, Krista, that you would like to add?
Hi, everyone. Yes, no, to reiterate Carolina's points, thank you all and for the great questions and chat. I think our digital scriber has been busy away creating a visual representation of what's been discussed today. Barbara, feel free to share your screen. We do need to review this to make sure that the panel are happy with its content, but once it's been through that process, we will be sure to share this with our attendees. So this is the first time we are all seeing this. So just a little sneak peek of what our digital scriber has created, which looks great. And we hope that this will be used together with the recording for you to all continue the discussion of translating content for inclusive engagement in your day-to-day translations and in your organizations. But I think that's all from me. Thanks again, everyone. So without further ado, I will end the webinar. Oh, one other thing, we will get back to you on those questions we haven't answered, as Carolina has said, along with the recording and the digital scribing asset. But thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye now.
thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Have a lovely day.